And today I wanted to review the chapter that we had started on last week, the review of the participle and some examples of the participle, and take questions, of course, and anything that has come up for you over the weekend while you were hopefully looking over some of the material. And I want to I did this in my Aleph class. I realized that I should do this with you guys as well. We are going to, we're going to refresh our memories with the concepts of letters as numbers in Hebrew, the gematria, which I know we looked at last semester. But I do think it's one of those learning tools that oftentimes kind of falls into the, oh, well, I learned this, but I actually don't really remember. So we're going to do a little review on that as well. And I think that will take us into 950 today. So before we begin, and thank you all for arriving in a timely fashion. Thank you very much for that. I'm hoping that I can't always remember how many we have registered. Usually there's 12 participants, but I can't always, it changes week to week. So I'm hoping that I'm going to start and not have to let people in to the room and man that or person that, waiting room thing, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's begin with any questions or I don't know, anything that came up over your reviewing that you might have some questions about that we can look over together as a class. Anything that was, I don't know, anything unclear? Any questions in the exercises? Was anyone able to, again, since this is a review, these exercises should have probably been or may have already been done the first time around. Does anyone have any questions about the exercises for chapter 4? No, yes, no. And if you do, you could just kind of, feel free to call out. We talked about did we talk about the et, how to use the et, that marker? We didn't review the et part of chapter 4? No. Okay. So if that's the case, we didn't review the et.
You asked us to focus on the et and the vet, I think.
Oh, the bet, the bocher be, when we talked about the be, the in.
Yeah.
Remind me, Sherry, what Sue's making a confused face. So remind me.
No, I just have written down that we were supposed to focus on the et and the bet, but I'm not sure why.
You're not sure why that is. Okay, it's possible that we were looking at, so if we turn to page 62, that might become clear because those are two pages that if we did go over them, it seems like some of you are giving me the eyebrow furrow, which always means like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I do the same thing, probably unconsciously. So if that's the case, let's look at page 62 and 63, and we can look at those two concepts with a little more clarity. So basically, I think this is something that probably is already clear to you from having gone as far as you have in this book, and just generally speaking in in learning about how to use Hebrew functionally. We oftentimes have. I'm going to start with the be first because that's an easier thing to kind of tackle before we get to the et. So I'm on the top of page 63, and we're basically talking a little bit about this preposition be, and they call it it is a prefix, but it's also a word in and of itself. And this is not different than any of the other prefix letters we've seen, the ha, the ve, the be, the le, the lamed, the mem, etc. All of these prefix letters, which sometimes are signifiers of small words like and the. And more often than not are prepositions, such as in, for, to, with, etc. And we'll learn them, obviously, some of them you already know. We'll add on to that as we continue through the book. So the bet letter, the reason they're bringing this up in this particular part of the text is that when we're using the verb bachar or bocher, to choose or to select, we always need to use the bet with the what is it that we are choosing, or who is it that we are choosing? And the bet is that prefix of in, or it actually means in. Like if I say ani ba bait or ani be Yisrael, the bet in front of the word bait or the be in front of the word Yisrael means in. And in this case, it's a strange preposition to use after the word to choose. So if you think about it, and again, I've mentioned this before, so this shouldn't be new, but often when we're translating something from one language to another, it's the prepositions that kind of don't always suit the translation, right? If I'm saying, I am choosing in him. I am choosing him to be the prophet, or ani bocher be, like when we're saying asher bachar banu. When we look at the tefillah of the Torah blessing, asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. This is not an example that they have in here, but looking at this, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. Does everyone know this one? Or asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim, depending on what translation you want, what version of that blessing you want to go with. Every time I say bachar banu, that bet of the banu means, what does it technically mean? Does anyone know? And that's the combination of that preposition be and the ending nu, which we know to mean anachnu, us. Correct. As we're all doing with this motion. I love it. So bachar asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim, who has chosen us. So the translation is God has chosen us from within the nations, right? Asher bachar banu. But that bet is an important letter because it signifies this concept of choosing. This is the direct object marker in us, choosing us. We can't say just bachar Yisrael, chose Israel. I could say bachar Yisrael, but it's not specific. I could say ani hu bachar chulza, he chose a shirt. But if I'm saying hu bachar be, I'm implying that there is a direct object following that was chosen. Ken?
Yeah, the book is very confusing because it says in Hebrew verbs formed from the root bachar never have a direct object. I mean, but that doesn't seem to be the case. We just with et.
Yeah. So let's look at that. In Hebrew, verbs formed with the root bachar never have a direct object. The word that we would consider the direct object in English is preceded in Hebrew not by the direct object marker et, but by the prefix be.
Yeah.
This prefix is attached to both. So sometimes the book gives rules that we kind of just are like, okay, well, sometimes it's not really getting into it. I think that because it's at the level it is, it's hard for, I don't even know. I'm not going to say why the book says it the way it does, but you're right, it is a little confusing. So sometimes what we need to keep in mind is that there are certain verbs that require us to employ a prefix that will then be attached to whatever the direct object of that verb is. In this case, when I'm using the word to choose, bocher, I'm going to shut my window because there's a little noise outside. Sorry. When I say bocher, I use the be after that. So when I say like bachar be neviim tovim or bachar ba Torah, that it's just I think it's just a rule of that particular verb, and there are others like it as well. It's not the only one that you need a kind of a preposition afterwards in order to indicate what is it that you're choosing. I'm trying to think of another one that might be easier to understand than choose. Here, okay, you could say shomer, like to guard. I could say hu shomer or hu shomer Yisrael, he guards Israel. But if I'm saying he's guarding someone, I usually have to say shomer al, on, guarding on.
Mm-hmm.
So the preposition that's usually used after the word shomer, shomer al. And Hebrew has a couple of those verbs that have to have a kind of preposition afterwards in order to indicate what is it that you are guarding or who is it that you are choosing. It doesn't translate well in English because we don't really need that extra word when we're translating it. So this is just, in this case, whenever we're looking at this verb bachar, which happens to be the one that they're focusing on, we're going to be mindful of the fact that, after the word bachar, we're going to have a bet in front of whatever it is that is being chosen. And you could see that, in the example, obviously, habocher ba Torah. In the example on the top of page 62, they list it, right? And I think that's where we ended last time, because I feel like I read that string of habocher ba Torah uve Moshe uve Yisrael uve neviei ha'emet v'tzedek. So all of these objects or these subjects that God is choosing. So we have ba Torah, be Moshe, Be-Yisrael, be-Nevi'ei ha'emet. So all of these things, right? The Torah, Moshe, Israel, and the prophets of truth and justice all have a bet in front of them. Some of them also have a vav, obviously, because we're listing. So we have and this and in this. So it doesn't really translate in the English. As you see, it doesn't say who chooses in the Torah and in Moses and in, but that's what that bet is. It's the word to choose. We wouldn't say to choose in English. It sounds weird. You would, right? You wouldn't say to choose in Hebrew you would. That's pretty much the bet. And I'll point it out again as it comes up, and you'll probably see it yourselves and kind of be like, hey, wait, is that what you were talking about with this prefix / preposition that happens after certain kinds of verbs? There needs to be that particular word. Is that kind of clear ish?
Yeah.
Nina? Not at all. Great. Okay. Nina's clear? Yeah. And Allison's not clear? What's the and Rafaela? So Allison, you're taking. So
I wouldn't understand it in English either, so just move on.
Rafaela, yes, please.
So you're saying Bachar is a word in itself,
well,
right?
It's a root and it means to choose. And Bachar is the past.
And it always gets like the next word always gets a preposition, or
correct. The next word, the word that is, what is it that's being chosen, must have this bet in front of it. And that's just I'm trying to think, is there something like that in English where you say you have a verb and the next word has to indicate what that verb does?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But they're saying here that it's part of the root and it's also is used as a prefix.
Yeah. Well, regardless, right?
That's a little confusing to me.
Okay, so what they're saying with that, and that is confusing, agreed, the bet is part of the root bet chet resh. So it could have been, it's random that the bet is also the start of the root bachar, bachar. And also the bet, it happens to be a letter that's used to form the preposition in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't get it, I'm not saying you'll never get it. It might not be relevant to this example. So Allison, stick with it for now. And whatever, it might be that you don't need to know the grammar.
Okay, I'll stick with it. I mean, it may come, it may not come, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Exactly. Let's not get too wound up about it. It's really, yeah, this is the least of our worries. Okay, so if we covered that, and so I think the reason why this is something that's interesting to look at is if we do look at this prayer of the blessing before the Haftorah reading on the top of page 62, if we look at that as an example and you're reading it to yourself and you're saying, well, what is that string of, why are there bets in front of, I know the word Torah does not have a bet in front of it. That's not how you spell Torah. It's not Batorah, that's not the word for Torah. So you might say to yourself, what is that bet there? And this is the attempt to explain what that bet is doing there and why there are a string of bets before every word following the verb, ha-bocher, the one who chooses, right? That's really why it's in there. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next little thing here, which is the word et, and that's another one that's a little bit odd, because again, it has literally no translation. So it's not even that it means in, but we don't use it in English. This word here is, they call it an indicator of the direct object, a direct object indicator. And in the case of all the examples they gave, which I know we read over, but I'm happy to do it again because this is something that the word et will come up not only in liturgical Hebrew, it comes up in modern Hebrew too. And it's one of those things that there is no translation for. So when we're using a definite noun, and we're using the definite article ha, before the ha is often the et is placed before the noun, the direct noun, the definite noun. So as it says in the book, and I'll read this and we could try to figure out, Ken, whether this is as confusing as the other example. In Hebrew, the word et is used to indicate the direct object of a verb. The direct object of a verb, as in hu ochel et ha lechem. I can say hu ochel lechem, he eats bread. Now, hu ochel et halechem is the specific bread. Why I can't say hu ochel halechem, I don't know. But we don't say hu ochel halechem. We must say hu ochel et halechem. So that et always needs to precede the definite article ha when indicating a direct object of the verb. What is he eating? He is eating the bread. So he is eating et the bread. That's what that is. And the et again has no translation. It just is there. So as we mentioned in the last chapter, I'm reading again, nouns that have the definite article ha are definite nouns, obviously. Possessive words like beitecha, your house, and names of people and places are also definite nouns, meaning if I am saying as the second example, he guards your house, hu shomer et beitecha. So I can say hu shomer et habayit, he guards the house, hu shomer et habayit. But if I want to say he guards your house, I would say hu shomer et beitecha. I don't need to say ha beitecha because beitecha, the cha at the end already implies specificity, right? Because it is your house. So I don't need the additional the in front of the word beitecha. And the same goes for hu shomer. This is weird because I would never say hu shomer et Moshe. I would say al. Actually, this is weird because they're using the verb that would oftentimes use the word hu shomer al Moshe. He guards Moses, like hu lo shomer et Moshe. But let's just not look at that example as being the best possible example with the word shomer. Point being that if I'm using a proper name, then I don't need to say the ha in front of Moshe. We already know that, like Yisrael, right? Hu shomer Yisrael means he is a guard of Israel. If I say hu shomer al Yisrael, then I'm saying he is guarding on Israel, not a guard of, but the action. That's actually interesting. Sorry, I just had a revelation of sorts. In order to differentiate sometimes the idea of what did we call it? Participle. The participle. We were talking about how last week this idea of the participle can kind of toggle between being a noun, a guard, or being the verb to guard. So sometimes the way that we can distinguish that is with the preposition, because if I'm saying I am a guard of Israel, I can say Ani shomer Yisrael. I am a guard. Then I am a guard of Israel. If I'm saying I am guarding Israel, then I would say Ani shomer al Yisrael, and that preposition would show me that the word shomer is not used as the noun a guard, but rather the verb I am guarding. The preposition. I had a revelation. I can't believe that I didn't think of that last year when I was teaching this. So that preposition it indicates that it's a verb and actually not a noun. Mm-hmm. We'll get back to that again as I formulate my revelation into more coherent sentences. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, all you need to know is that the word et is used in conjunction with the definite article ha to indicate a direct object. And we will see it again and again. And then like here, let's look at the example on the bottom of page 63. Anyone want to do me the grand favor of keeping me from hearing my own voice any more than I have to and read Vishamru? All right, Stephen. Oh, unmute yourself and then we'll hear your lovely voice.
It helps better. Okay. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
Pause there for 1 second. That was fantastic. What are the two examples that are bolded? And how are we using the et?
Et ha-Shabbat, et ha-Shabbat.
Right. So and what verbs precede the et ha-Shabbat well, they're two different verbs, but what are they doing with this Shabbat?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. Look at the beginning of the very first word of that
Vishamru?
Yeah, exactly. So what root do you see in the word Vishamru?
To guard.
Exactly. So that is the verb that then what is it that they are guarding?
To guard the children of Israel.
No, they're not guarding the children of Israel. They're not guarding the children of Israel, but they're guarding. So that's why you look for the et, and then you look for what follows it, and that's the direct object of the verb.
So they're guarding Shabbat for
That's it. They're guarding. Who's guarding Shabbat? It's the sentence structure is a little bit reversed.
I see, the children of
Got
Israel are guarding Shabbat.
Exactly. Vishamru. So it's like the children of Israel, Vishamru. And because this is from the Torah, as you can see, it's out of the book of Exodus. This particular Vishamru is not a vav that means and, even though it can be translated as and they guarded. The vav is something called the reversing vav. The reversing vav, you don't even need to know about this because we're not doing biblical Hebrew, but the reversing vav is a term that's used when using the a tense, it's a biblical tense basically. So the vishamru means and they guarded. It's a past continuous form. We could talk about that another time, but that vav in front of the vishamru is just an indicator of a specific biblical tense called the reversing vav. But that's the verb in there, shamru. What do we know about the ending of the u ending? I'm just going to throw ourselves into this for 1 second. What's the u ending indicate? Usually we say a nu, but what is the u? It indicates that is a
We?
It's not new. It's not new. So it's not us. It's not us. But you look at the sentence, you could probably figure out who it's referring to.
He.
They, V'nei Yisrael, V'shamru. So the u ending we haven't looked at yet. That is the third person plural masculine, and they kept, and they guarded. B'nei Yisrael. So you could say, if you were writing it in a proper sentence, you would say, B'nei Yisrael, Shamru, et HaShabbat. That would be the proper sentence structure for that. But because we're looking at a biblical text, it's not necessarily flowing in the way we're used to seeing the order of the sentence. But Stephen, as you read, Shamru is the verb. And if we want to know, if you were doing one of those like, 9th grade French analyses of what's the direct object, what's the indirect object, who's the subject, what's the verb, we could probably do that very easily in this sentence. So we've got who's the subject of the sentence? B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel. What's the verb of the sentence? Well, it's a partial sentence, but whatever. What's the verb?
To Vishamru.
Right, to keep or to guard. And what is the direct object of what is it that they were guarding?
Shabbat.
That's it. That's basically it. So that's a very clear example of how we're using that et HaShabbat to figure out what the direct object of the sentence is. And now, so you can continue with the same thing for the second bit. So what's the second bit? This might be a little bit harder. So we have the verb is, the next part that you read was.
Yeah, I know. La'asot.
Yes.
HaShabbat.
Okay, pause there. So what is la'asot? What do we look at that verb yet? Ayin. The ayin sin taf,
Yeah.
or ayin sin hey rather, like ose shalom. We didn't look at that yet, did we? No, because it's a bit of an odd verb. Ose, we know the word ose shalom, the term, Nina?
To make or to do.
To make or to do, right? Ose. So in this case here, to, as you see in the translation, la'asot et HaShabbat. So to make or to do what? Or what are they making or doing? They're making or doing the Sabbath, rather they're celebrating. But la'asot et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam. So to make the Sabbath, as it continues, for their generations. Berit olam, a covenant of eternity. So again, say that one more time.
What are the 3 letters of the root? The ot is an ending, right?
Well, no, it's not. It's not an ending. It's an infinitive. That is the infinitive of to make. To make, rather.
The lamed and the
lamed is not part of it. The lamed is part of the structure of the infinitive.
That's what I thought.
Which we'll look at that a little bit later on. But the root of the ose shalom is ayin. Yeah. Ayin sin or shin hey. It's a hey at the end, and because it's what we call called a lamed hey verb, and because the verbs that end in a hey, all of them drop the hey at their when they're conjugated, and oftentimes, well, in the infinitive, the hey is almost always dropped, which is why it doesn't look. You can't see it in la'asot. There's no hey in there, but it is part of the root.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, this is la'asot ose. It's not even it is. It's in chapter 7 apparently. We're going to look at ose. All right. So bachar be and et ha the. So if we continue in this, in the Vishamwa, the last bit here is et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. All right, can someone read for me after the comma on the 1, 2, 3, third line after the comma, ki? Does anyone want to read me just that last little comma bit, Sue?
Okay, yeah, the list. Okay, ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et. Keep going.
Keep going till the next comma, till the end of the line.
Oh, okay. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
Okay, so what's going on there? We're going to use the same logic that we did with Stephen. What's going on? What's our verb? This might be, well, actually, it's not hard at all. You're going to see it very blatantly sticking you in the face with what's the verb and who is the subject of that verb.
Oh, you're asking me. Ki sheshet is sheshet. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So ki sheshet yamim is its own little bubble, and I'll translate that for you so that you don't get confused. Ki is because, ki or due to, sheshet yamim. So shesh means the number shesh, the number 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sheshet means well, whatever. It's an adjective form of the number 6. 6 days. Yom is a word day. Yamim is the plural. Because for 6 days, that's one little parenthesis. And then I want you to continue with Asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So I very, very gave you narrow margins there. So tell me who's the verb, who's the subject, and what is the definite object of that? You got no choices there, Sue.
Asa is the verb.
Correct.
Okay. Asa. Just say this. Well, the object is hashamayim. I know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are 2 objects.
Oh, and also haaretz.
Correct. And then who's the actor of this?
Oh, well, I guess it's Adonai.
Okay. All right. No, it's not that hard.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
not that
So
hard.
exactly. Thank you so much for that. So what we have here is we have the verb, and here is Ken. Here is the verb asa in its form
Yeah,
with its
thank
root.
you.
With its
Yep.
full root. Asa. This is a past tense. If I say ose, like ose shalom is my participle, the kind of form that we're looking at, which is the present tense conjugation. Asa is the past tense. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai. So we can again flip it. Usually we're like Adonai asa. If we were looking at a modern construction, we would have our subject verb and then we'd have our direct object. In this case, it's a biblical lift, so it's got a very different kind of construction. And in this case, we have asa Adonai, the verb before the subject, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And there you have 2 direct objects that are being asa, that are being created. What's interesting to me is the use of the word asa and not the word bara. Sherry, I'll get to you in just a second. Because oftentimes when we talk about God as being a creator, we use the word bara, created.
That's what I was going to ask. Why they use created.
You know what? I don't know. I really don't know. And I wonder whether there is, if I go into this, and after class, I'll look at Sefaria. If you're more than welcome to do the same, to see if there's any kind of commentary about that. Why is it asa and not bara? Because we always talk about creation as not being.
Or if it's more like it's work, and on the 7th day you rest.
Oh.
God was working, not creating. You know what I mean?
Interesting. That's interesting. I mean, because I'm trying to see if we use. There's no word bara in this text. That verb is not used at all. The creating verb. So it is interesting. Yeah, we can get back to that. That's not a more philosophical question, but still an interesting one. If we look at the middle of page 64, interesting. Sherry, this is going to be a little confusing, but what do we have on Genesis 1:1 in the middle of that page of page 64? Sherry, you want to read that one? Since you brought it up.
Okay. The blessing before the Haftorah.
No, the middle passage from Genesis 1:1.
Oh, got it.
64.
Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
Okay, how is this a little different from what we saw? Okay.
Right. Yeah, because this has bara instead of asa.
Yeah.
He
So
uses
do our little breakdown of that sentence as well. Tell me what's going on there. What are the verbs? What's the subject? And what's the direct object?
Okay, well, Breshit is created, right?
It's not created. It's not created. So Bereshit is kind of another kind of parenthetical word. We're going to keep that aside from the sentence. So what does the word Bereshit mean?
Oh, Breshit, begin. Breshit would be the begin in the beginning.
Bereshit. So what's interesting about that word? So let's take a look at that for 1 second. So Bereshit. So I have the prefix in that word. That word, if I break it down, is be, and then I have reshit. And if you look at that word carefully, I want you to see if you could spot a word that you might already know. And this could go. This is an open question to anyone. This is not just directed at Sherry. I don't want to put you on the spot. Anyone who might look at that, tell me what they can break open in the word bereshit.
In the beginning.
Rosh. Yes. So there. Okay. Good. So both of you. So I've got two answers. I've got two answers in this. George and Allison, both of you. I've got be, which is in, because we talked about the be just a couple of minutes ago, and I have the word reshit, which in it has the word rosh. So we know the word rosh means head, but what else do we use the word rosh for?
Rosh Hashanah.
Right?
Rosh Hashanah. Rishon, we use the word for rishon for the word first. It's the word that it's used to imply a start. So we use it to the word head as like the start of the body or the start of the year, or the or rishon. It's all the same root of resh, aleph, shin. If you look at that, that's our root for start or first. I mean, there's a lot of things in there, but in the beginning. So reshit. There's an expression in Hebrew that I can say reshit kol, which means first of all, and it's a very proper way of saying first of all. Reshit kol, reshit, and that's the part of the word of be reshit. The reshit kol means to start. So that word is not. Say it again. I heard someone say something. I wasn't sure.
I'm sorry, I coughed. I probably.
Oh, you coughed, Stephen. Well, I hope you're all right there. I heard a little.
Cleared my throat. It wasn't even
Oh.
cough. It was kind of a huh. Like
Okay, it was the start of a Hebrew word, basically, is what it was. So bereshit, I'm saying in the start, in the beginning, and then the word of obviously bereshit, because it's the first word of the Torah, it then becomes the name of the book. I don't know if you know this too, that in the Torah we name the parshas and we name the books after the first significant word in the line that begins it. So if the reason we call the book Bereshit is because it begins with the word Bereshit, obviously. Same thing with Shmot, Exodus begins with Ele Shmot. These are the names. And then the book is called Shmot, which then obviously can be used as a kind of template for, the theme of the book is X, Y, and Z. But the word Bereshit, in the beginning. So then what do we have? Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. There you go. Bara. That's our verb. And again, it's the past tense. It's the same tense we heard before when we said asa, bara, asa. That is a past tense form of he, second person masculine singular. When we get to some of the other tenses, so outside of the participle / present tense, all of the conjugations for the past and the future tenses are pronoun specific, meaning that there are 12 cases. That's why we're not doing that first. But bara is past tense, and we know that it implies second person masculine singular he. So bara Elohim, same thing again. We have the verb first, then the subject. So bara Elohim, meaning Elohim bara.
Yeah. He created.
Exactly. God created. Exactly. Right. For our cases, I guess we're just going to say God and not he, even though the verb implies he. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Same thing again that we saw just beforehand, these two direct objects. I hope that those examples at least were a little clarifying for the et. Yes, Nina.
Mia, I'd like to ask a question that has a little to do with punctuation. I notice in Genesis 1:1 that in the English translation, we have in the beginning, comma, but no comma after Bereshit. And even above it, in the blessings before the Torah, where we would normally have a comma to help clarify, to set off, the in the beginning, whatever. Is that So it's safe to say that commas are not used all that much in biblical Hebrew or in Hebrew in general, or a different use than we do?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I'll answer this as clearly as I can. That's a very good question. First of all, so we all know that in biblical Hebrew, if we're going back to Torah text, all of the punctuation that exists in any of its forms, and the punctuation I'm going to say loosely is the colon, which separates the verses, and the Torah trope, the trope notes. If you've ever read Torah before, then you might know that the trope notes serve as a kind of a punctuation.
Like etnachta.
Exactly. Exactly. Good job. So the etnachta, thank you, Sherry. The etnachta, which goes like, actually, I have a feeling that Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim goes, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. I'm almost sure that that's the trope note marks for that verse. So when we're singing, certain trope music indicates commas in the music. And that is, as Sherry indicated, an etnachta, which looks like a wishbone if you ever want to just open a text and look for it. And we can do this if there's an interest. I'm happy to do a little bit of this idea of biblical punctuation, which is in the form of trope notes. That particular type of note indicates a comma in the reading. Now, the text itself has no punctuation at all. That's correct. So the fact that there's a comma in the translation is obviously an editor's, that's entirely subjective, because that's not something that exists in the Torah. And to be honest, even the separator, the colons that separate the different verses were put on many years after the Torah was written by the Masoretes, the same group of people who created the Nikud, the vowel system, and the Torah trope system, and the ones who took the whole Torah text and separated it into chapters, verses, etc. They were the ones who put order to it because they recognized that there was no standard for reading, no standard of pronunciation. We talked about this a long time ago, but they created that system. So yeah, there isn't any. And even in this lifting of the page 63, Veshamru b'nei Israel et Shabbat, comma, that doesn't exist in the Torah. The comma is entirely an editorial choice because there isn't any commas. At the very least, the colon is the only thing that exists. And there are spaces usually between chapters and definitely between books. So separating the 5 books of the Torah, there's a large spaces in the scroll. But if you ever looked at a scroll, you would see that there's not an indicator whatsoever of the end of a sentence, let alone a comma. So that if that's an answer to the question, that is entirely something that's not natural to the Torah. Okay, so as promised, we came to the end of this chapter. If there are any returning questions to this, I'm happy to take them either today or on Wednesday. But I would like to say that we're done with chapter 4. Let's move just for 1 second to chapter 71 to page 71 for a second, because this will lead me back into this gematria, to this letters and as numbers. A kind of a tiny step in that direction, and I'll explain why in just a second. So oftentimes, if everyone can turn to page 71, this is the first time I've used this gallery view and not had a single slide on the screen because it hasn't been appropriate yet. But we will be having slides very soon, don't you worry. Page 71 explains this use of acronyms in Hebrew. And I don't know if they call it that in here. Anyway, what it talks about is the word Tanakh. A lot of you will have heard that before, a reference to the Tanakh. And I just want to cover this briefly because it's kind of like a Judaism 101 thing that I think you should all know. So when we talk about the word Tanakh, it refers to the collection, not just of the 5 books of the Torah, but also to the writings and to the prophets. So I'm going to assume a certain amount of Jewish, what's called basics, that you guys understand what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to go, too basic on this, but the collection of the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, taking the first letter from Torah, from Nevi'im and Ketuvim, create this acronym of the Tanakh. as you can see in all of the sightings of Tanakh, that is the first paragraph and then throughout the rest of this text, they use the letters Tanakh, and they give it vowels. They give these letters vowels, but they also put a little quotation mark between the two last letters, the nun and the chaf. So a couple of things here. First of all, has anyone heard the term Tanakh before as a reference to look it up in the Tanakh, the Tanakh, the Tanakh? Okay, so that's not news to you. Did any of you know that the word Tanakh was not a word, but rather an acronym? Some yes, some no. Okay, great. That's good. It's good to have a mix of opinions and knowledge bases. So in Hebrew, it is not uncommon to use acronyms, and this predates texting, way predates texting, before we even thought about LOLs and all those other annoying things that one now uses in regular speak. So Tanakh is, we know, how do we know it's an acronym? What's the first indicator?
That quote, that double quote.
Andrew, yeah, yes, the quotation mark. Andrew, is that what you were going to say too? Yes. No, it's fine too. Don't worry about it. Calling out makes things go faster. It's totally fine. And you can call out, unmute yourself and call out. We're small enough that it's not going to be annoying. I promise. And if it is, I'll tell you. So Tanakh, quotation marks. And we use the quotation marks to tell us that that's not a word. Those quotation marks, again, are not something that are used in Hebrew. We have a different, like the quotation mark looks different in Hebrew. So we know that that's not used as an open quote in that someone is speaking and they're saying the letter ch. That's not really what that means. And usually when it's in a group of letters, it'll always come between the last and the second to last letters. Sometimes an acronym can be very long. Oftentimes we use acronyms in modern Hebrew in Israel in military terms. And a lot of military terms are, and obviously the military is a very large part in Israeli culture. So a lot of these terms then become parts of regular speak. Which, watching Israeli television, I honestly sometimes have no idea what they're talking about when they use those terms, because they're all references that I have no connection to whatsoever. But I know that they're military terms, and they always, the other indicator of this, which is a weird thing, is that in English, when we have an acronym, we usually say like AWOL or MIA or LOL or etc. We kind of name the letters. Yeah. And in Hebrew, what they do in order to make this a little faster and less of a taf nun chaf, they indicate the vowels, and the vowels are always ah sounds. It's always an ah when it's an acronym. It's never unless there's a yud, and if there's a yud, usually you read the yud as an e. Weird, I know, it's a little weird. And I'm trying to think of what other another example of that. We're going to go right into this gematria thing, and then that'll become more clear. Tanakh. I'm trying to hear matkal, even in the ramkal, matkal, all of the kind of military terms also all use ah sounds. So when you're saying them, also the chances are, if you're listening to it, you can detect that it's an acronym based on the fact that all the letters are ahs. Weird, right? Okay, I know you're gonna have questions about this when we get into the gematria, but for now, what we're looking at is this word Tanakh. And to remember that when we're looking at it, it is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im. And we know the word Nevi'im if you listen to the blessings, right? Asher Bahar Bi Nevi'ei Ha'emet Vatzedek, Nevi'im Tovim. Nevi'im are prophets. Navi, Nevi'im, HaNavi, Eliyahu HaNavi, right? Elijah the prophet. And Ketuvim. The Ketuvim comes from the root word Kotev or Katav, right? Which means to write. And those are all the scrolls, the writings, the Psalms, etc. So any questions about the Tanakh before we move into the exciting world of gematria? We have about 6 minutes. I think I can do this in 6 minutes. Questions? Okay, let's see how well I can do this. All right, so who remembers anything from our gematria lesson, which was years and years ago at this point? Sounds like forever. Anyone remember anything about gematria? All right, so what we said was, here is slide.
Well,
yes. No, go. Say.
I was just going to say that it sort of coordinates with the beginning of the alphabet for a while, and then is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong at all. It's not wrong at all. It exactly. So this was here we have an example. This is the very beginning, and I kind of had a gripe with this slide when it was very hard to find basic slides, that it was done for English readers, and so it's backwards. So
Yeah.
bear with that. Exactly. So what it does is it takes the letters and it uses the letters as their numeric value of where they appear in the alphabet, in the same way that you could say, you know, C is the number 3 and D is the number 4. In this case, we have a kind of math, it's not even math actually, it's just a combination of letters and a combination of letters which will then create numbers. So what we said was, Sherry, you were right, we go from Aleph to Yud is our, actually that's not true, from Aleph to Tet is our units, is our ones places. So we go Aleph, Bet, Gimel, all the way to Tet is 1 to 9. Straightforward. If you know your Aleph, Bet in order, you can always count it on your fingers, right? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, etc. That's from 1 to 9. Yud is our big game changer. Yud becomes the number 10, which it still is the number 10 in the alphabet order, but then it becomes the number by which we create tens places. So if we want to say the number 11, we use a combination of Yud and Aleph. We do the tens part first. So we don't say Aleph Yud, we say the Yud, the tens place, then the ones place. In the same way that we're going in a kind of, I don't even know if we would do that in English. I guess you would say 21 versus 1 and 20. In other languages, they would do it backwards, like in German or Yiddish. So Yud Bet, etc. When we get to 19, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, the name of God, which I know we talked about last time, we're going to talk about it again. But for now, just the basics here are when we want to create the number 20, 20 all of a sudden becomes, it's not Yud Yud. Obviously, we can't do Yud Yud. God forbid, that's the name of God. We don't do Yud Yud. We go to Kaf. Kaf is our number 20. So what happens basically is we have this kind of a basic, we max out at 400 with a letter Taf, but little asterisks, there are ways around that. So this is the basic form. I'm going to show you a couple of more slides to make this a little bit clearer. Anyone else have any questions about this basic slide before we move on? Okay, let me close this guy, and I've got, no, I don't want to close the tab. Hold on a second. Okay, here we go. This is one slide. We saw this guy over here, and then this is the one I want to show you, this one right here. Okay, so here we have, this is our kind of combination box where we can go from the tens, we can go to 12, 13, 14, etc. I'm going to point out, as I did before, this little box over here, which is gray, and I'm sorry that it's a little small. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because I recognize that we're not all, the quality of the slide is not great, so it's just not going to be particularly clear, but that should help. Is that helpful? Okay. So what we have going on in the gray box is an issue. We reach this issue here as it says, the numbers 15 and 16 are not written as you might expect, i.e. as Yud He or Yud Vav, obviously, because if we write Yud He and Yud Vav or Yud Yud, we are creating the name of God. So what they've done instead was replace the 10 plus 5 and 10 plus 6 with 9 plus, where did it go? With Tet Zayin and Tet Vav. So the addition is going to be the same. It's still going to create the number 15, but instead of saying 10 and 5, it's doing 9 and 6 and 9 and 7. Does that make sense? We've already covered this before, but this is just a little reminder. So note the Hebrew final letters are also assigned numeric values, etc. This was kind of done. This is not traditional necessarily that the final letters have a larger value, but when kind of expanding the numbers and trying to get past 400, there are some who use the final letters to extend the counting beyond the number 400. Now we can add numbers together. This only obviously goes up to 409. This is obviously not a full range of all the numbers that can be created. Because when we look at the way that we create a year, I'm going to get this slide out. I'm going to close this guy and get a new one in here, which is going to be this one. When we're creating a year, basically what we're doing is we're taking the 400 and the 300 and making them into 700. So I'll go back for a second to explain what that means. The Hebrew year, basically, as we know, has been, at least for the past 5,000 years has started in the thousands. I mean, we're counting at this point the Hebrew year at 5781, I think is what we just celebrated for this past Rosh Hashanah. It's obviously an older text, but the 5,000 never really needs to be placed on the year because it's assumed, and it will be that for 1,000 years. So no one really needed to change that the five. When we get to 6, I guess it'll be a different story. But what we do is we express the year as the hundreds place rather than from the thousands place. So if we look at the year, this year is, who knows what the letters of this year is? So it's going to be at a 700.
Shin.
700, tough shin, yep.
Het.
Pei.
Hey.
Tafshin Pei Aleph. Tafshin Pei Aleph. So this is Pei is the 80. Pei is 80 and Aleph is 1, obviously.
5780.
So last year would have been 5780 would just be Tough Shin Pei.
Correct. Tough Shin Pei. So last year this was this was it. Tough Shin Pei. That was the year. This year we move that little quotation mark to this side and we add an Aleph to it. Yeah, weird, right? So you can grow the word and grow the number, right? Tafshin Pei Aleph. So we don't have, someone asked in one of my other classes, do we have a 0? Is there a 0? The answer is no, there's no 0 because we don't need a 0. In the case of Tafshin Pei, I didn't need a 0 because basically it was implied in the number 20, there's a 0 at the end of that, but I don't do Tafshin Pei 0, right? I don't do that. The Pei is already to 0. When I add my unit, oh shoot, I need to go. We need to go, sorry. Basically, that's the beginning of it. When do we use this? We use it to mark calendar dates. We use it to mark years. We use it in Torah text to indicate verses, chapters, and lines. We use it on tombstones. We use it to indicate yahrzeit dates. So it's not used to count. It's not used for math. It's not used to indicate any kind of numeric value of stuff. I don't say I have Aleph books on my desk. That's not, we use the word achat. We have a number system that we count with, and we will look at that on Wednesday. So I'm gonna pause here. I'm not gonna close it, but I'm gonna pause. Questions, please come up with some questions for Wednesday. If not, we'll continue on this and we'll move on to chapter 5. Have a wonderful day. Yom Tov to the rest of you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful sunny day, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.